I never thought a snowplow would become my weapon of choice in a war against suburban tyranny. But here I was at 11:45 on a Tuesday night, sitting in the cab of my modified Ford F-350 with a full emergency light bar and an air horn that could wake the dead 3 counties over. My name is Aaron Yates, and I have lived in the pristine, cookie-cutter nightmare known as Meadowbrook Estates in Wisconsin for exactly 3 years. When my wife died 2 years ago, this house became both my sanctuary and my prison. I work from home as a software consultant, which gives me plenty of time to maintain my property and apparently plenty of time to become the target of the most vindictive HOA president in the entire Midwest. The trouble started 6 weeks ago during the first real snowfall of the season. I own a snow removal business on the side, something I started after my wife passed because sitting alone in an empty house was driving me insane. The physical work helped. The early mornings gave me purpose. I had contracts with 3 commercial properties and about 15 residential clients in the area. None of them were in Meadowbrook Estates because, according to our HOA rules, running a business that involved equipment storage on your property was prohibited. I kept my work truck and plow at a storage facility 10 miles away, but I did use my personal truck to clear my own driveway. That was where everything went sideways. The snow started falling around 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. By midnight, we had 8 inches on the ground with another 4 predicted before dawn. I had to be at my first commercial property by 5 in the morning, which meant I needed to clear my driveway by 4 at the latest. So at 3:30 in the morning, I went outside, fired up my truck, and spent 15 minutes clearing my driveway and the approach to my garage. I was back inside by 4, showered and out the door by 4:30. My first commercial job went smoothly. So did the second and third. By 10 in the morning, I had cleared all my contracted properties and was heading home, exhausted but satisfied. I pulled into my freshly cleared driveway, noticed that my neighbors were just starting to shovel their walks, and went inside to crash for a few hours. At 2 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang. I answered it to find Sharon Mitchell standing on my porch, her thin lips pressed into a line so tight they had disappeared entirely. Sharon was 53 years old, had the kind of helmet hair that defied both gravity and common sense, and possessed the unique ability to find fault with absolutely everything. She had been the HOA president for 7 years, ruling over Meadowbrook Estates like a discount store dictator. "Aaron," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we need to talk about this morning. I was still half asleep and not in the mood. What about this morning? You were plowing your driveway at 3:30 in the morning. That's unacceptable." I blinked at her. "Unacceptable how?" "It's my driveway." Sharon pulled out a piece of paper from her designer handbag. Everything Sharon owned was designer, which was impressive considering she did not work, and her husband was a middle manager at an insurance company. According to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws, no loud mechanical equipment may be operated before 6 in the morning or after 9 at night. You violated this rule. You'll be receiving a fine in the mail. Sharon, I had to get to work. I run a snow removal business. If I don't clear my driveway, I can't get to my clients. That's not the HOA's problem, Aaron. Rules are rules. You should have cleared your driveway the night before. The snow didn't start until 4 in the afternoon. It was still falling when I went to bed at 10. Then you should have done it between 6 and 9 in the morning. I had to be at work by 5. I already explained that. Sharon smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you want to check your wallet. Again, not the HOA's problem. The fine is $250. You have 30 days to pay. Have a nice day, Aaron." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on my porch like gunshots. I stood there, stunned, until the cold air finally made me close the door. The fine arrived by certified mail 3 days later. $250 for operating loud machinery during quiet hours. I called my lawyer, a guy named Ben Parsons who had helped me with my wife's estate. Ben looked over the bylaws and sighed. "Technically, they're right," he said. "The noise ordinance is pretty clear. However, there's usually some wiggle room for necessary maintenance. You could fight it, but it would cost you more in legal fees than the fine itself. So I just pay it, you could. Or you could comply with the rule, don't plow before 6 in the morning. Ben, my clients expect me at 5. Some of them even earlier. If I wait until 6 to clear my driveway, I'll be late to every job. Then you need to find another solution. Could you clear it the night before? The snow doesn't always cooperate with that schedule." Ben shrugged. "I'm sorry, Aaron. Sometimes HOAs are just impossible to deal with. You could try to attend a board meeting and request an exception." I did exactly that. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening in the community center, a small building at the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates that mostly sat empty, except for these monthly torture sessions. I arrived at 6:55 and found about 20 other residents already there, most of them looking as thrilled as I felt. Sharon sat at a table at the front of the room with 4 other board members. Richard Kowalski, the vice president who was basically Sharon's yes man. Patricia Gomez, the treasurer who seemed perpetually confused. Daniel Frost, the secretary who spent most meetings playing on his phone. And Linda Chen, the only board member who occasionally showed signs of independent thought. The meeting started with Sharon reading the minutes from the last meeting, followed by a financial report from Patricia that consisted mostly of her stammering through numbers while Sharon glared at her. Then came the open forum where residents could bring up concerns. I raised my hand. Sharon's expression soured immediately. "Yes, Aaron," I stood up. "I'm here to request an exception to the noise ordinance. I run a snow removal business and I need to clear my driveway before 6 in the morning to get to my clients on time. I'm asking for permission to operate my plow between 5 and 6 in the morning on days when snow removal is necessary." "Denied," Sharon said immediately. "You didn't even discuss it with the board." "I don't need to. The noise ordinance exists for a reason. Residents have the right to peaceful mornings. It's 1 hour, 1 day a week at most, and only during snow season. The answer is no, Aaron. Sit down." I remained standing. "I'm formally requesting a vote from the full board." Sharon's face flushed red. Linda Chen raised her hand. "I think we should discuss it. An hour exception for necessary business operations seems reasonable." "It sets a precedent," Sharon snapped. "If we allow Aaron to violate quiet hours, then everyone will want to." "No one else runs a snow removal business," Linda pointed out. "That's not the point. The rules apply to everyone equally." Richard leaned over and whispered something to Sharon. She nodded, then turned back to me. "Fine. We'll take a vote. All in favor of granting Aaron an exception to operate his plow between 5 and 6 in the morning during snow season." Linda raised her hand. No one else did. All opposed, Sharon, Richard, Patricia, and Daniel raised their hands. Motion denied. "Sit down, Aaron." I sat down, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. The meeting continued for another 45 minutes, covering such pressing issues as whether the community should plant tulips or daffodils in the spring flower beds, and whether the font on the entrance sign was too modern. I left the moment Sharon adjourned, went home and opened a beer. Over the next 3 weeks, we got 2 more significant snowfalls. Both times, I waited until 6 in the morning to clear my driveway. Both times, I was late to at least 2 client properties. My clients were understanding the first time, annoyed the second time. One of them, a strip mall that needed their parking lot clear by 6 for early morning deliveries, told me that if it happened again, they would find another service. I could not afford to lose clients. My wife's medical bills had drained most of our savings, and the snow removal business was helping me rebuild. I needed every contract I had, so when the weather forecast predicted another major snowstorm, I made a decision. If Sharon wanted to play games with the rules, I would play games right back. The snow started falling around 8 that evening. By 11, we had 6 inches with another 8 predicted overnight. I set my alarm for 11:45 and tried to get a few hours of sleep. When the alarm went off, I dressed in my warmest gear and headed outside. But I did not get into my personal truck. Instead, I got into my work truck, the one I had driven home from the storage facility that afternoon. It was a 2019 Ford F350 with a 8-foot plow blade, and I had made some modifications over the past week. The first modification was a full LED light bar mounted on the roof, the kind police cars and emergency vehicles use. Red and blue lights that could be seen from half a mile away. Completely legal to own, even if they were typically frowned upon for civilian use. Wisconsin law had some gray areas about emergency vehicle lighting on private property, and I had done my research. The second modification was an air horn system, the kind used on trains and semi-trucks. It produced a sound level of about 150 decibels, which was just under the threshold for permanent hearing damage but well above the level of comfortable conversation. I fired up the truck at exactly 11:55. The engine rumbled to life, and I flipped on the light bar. Red and blue strobes lit up my driveway, the front of my house, and half the street. I could see lights coming on in windows up and down the block. At exactly midnight, I dropped the plow blade and started clearing my driveway. And as I did, I laid on the air horn. 3 long blasts, each lasting about 5 seconds. The sound was incredible, a deep, resonating wail that echoed through the entire neighborhood. I took my time. Normally, I could clear my driveway in 10 minutes. That night, I stretched it to 30, making sure to hit the air horn at regular intervals. The lights stayed on the entire time, painting the neighborhood in alternating waves of red and blue. By the time I finished, every house on my street had lights on. I could see curtains being pulled back, doors opening, people stepping onto porches to see what the chaos was about. I calmly backed my truck into the garage, shut off the lights and engine, and went back inside. I made myself a cup of coffee and waited. Sharon showed up at 12:45. I saw her marching up my driveway in a bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, her face so red it was almost purple. She pounded on my door like she was trying to break it down. I opened it and smiled. "Sharon, what can I do for you? What the hell do you think you are doing?" she screamed. Clearing my driveway after midnight, so technically during quiet hours. At midnight, with sirens and lights, air horns, not sirens, and emergency lights, yes, all completely legal. This is harassment. No, Sharon, this is compliance. You said I couldn't clear my driveway before 6 in the morning. Well, midnight is after 6 in the morning. It's actually 18 hours after 6 in the morning, depending on how you count. So I'm in full compliance with HOA rules. You know damn well what those rules mean. Actually, I don't. The bylaws say no loud mechanical equipment before 6 in the morning or after 9 at night. Midnight is after 9 at night, so I'm good. Sharon's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I'll fine you for this." "For what?" "Following the rules. Go ahead. I'll see you in court." I'm sure a judge would love to hear about how the HOA fined a homeowner for following their own bylaws. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "This isn't over." "I agree. I'll probably have to clear my driveway again tomorrow night if the snow keeps up. Sleep well, Sharon." I closed the door in her face and listened to her stomp back down my driveway. Through the window, I watched her march up to 3 other houses, probably rallying the neighbors against me. I did not care. I had been polite, I had been reasonable, and I had been ignored. Now I was being petty, and it felt fantastic. The next morning I got up at 4:30, drove to my first client property, and had everything cleared by my usual schedule. My clients were happy. I was happy. The only people who were not happy were the residents of Meadowbrook Estates, and I was fine with that. The snow continued through the next day, so at 11:55 that night, I repeated the performance. Truck out of the garage, lights on, air horn blaring, 30 minutes of the slowest, most thorough driveway clearing in the history of snow removal. This time, Sharon showed up with reinforcements. Her husband Greg stood behind her looking exhausted and vaguely apologetic, along with Richard Kowalski and about 10 other neighbors. I opened the door and addressed the crowd. "Evening, folks. Sorry about the noise, but I've got to clear my driveway." "You're doing this on purpose." Sharon shrieked. "I'm doing this out of necessity. I tried to do it at a reasonable hour, but the HOA told me I couldn't, so I'm doing it during approved hours." One of the neighbors, a guy named Mike who lived 4 houses down, stepped forward. "Come on, Aaron. This is ridiculous. Can't you just wait until morning like everyone else?" "I have to be at work by 5 in the morning, Mike. If I wait until 6 to clear my driveway, I'm late. I lose clients. I lose income. I asked the HOA for a 1-hour exception and they denied it, so this is my solution." "This is insane," another neighbor said. "I agree. It's insane that I have to do this, but Sharon left me no choice." Sharon pushed her way to the front of the group. "We're calling the police." "Go ahead. I'm not breaking any laws." She pulled out her phone and dialed. I went back inside and waited, finishing my coffee while I listened to the crowd argue outside. About 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Derek Santos got out, a guy I actually knew from the local diner where I grabbed breakfast sometimes. He looked at the crowd, looked at my truck sitting in the garage with its light bar still mounted on top, and sighed. I went outside to meet him. "Evening, Derek." "Aaron. What's going on?" Sharon immediately launched into a tirade about harassment, noise violations, and public disturbances. Derek listened patiently, then turned to me. "Your side." I explained the situation. The HOA fine, the denied exception, the threat to my business, and my decision to comply with the rules in the most literal way possible. Derek rubbed his forehead. "So you're clearing your driveway after 9 at night because the HOA says you can't do it before 6 in the morning." "Exactly. And the lights and horn. The lights are legal on private property. The horn is a safety device." "A safety device." "Absolutely. It alerts people that heavy machinery is in operation. Wouldn't want anyone walking into the path of a moving plow." Derek looked like he wanted to laugh but was fighting it. "Aaron, the noise complaints are going to keep coming. I'm going to have to keep coming out here." "I understand. But I'm not breaking any laws, am I?" "No," he admitted. "You're not. Town noise ordinances allow for necessary maintenance and safety operations. Snow removal qualifies." Sharon exploded. "That's ridiculous. He's clearly doing this to harass the neighborhood." Derek turned to her. "Madam, he's plowing his driveway. That's not harassment. And he's doing it during hours that technically comply with your HOA rules, even if the timing is unconventional. But the noise is no different than if someone's car alarm went off, or if there was an emergency vehicle in the area. He's not violating any laws. Then I'll sue him. That's your right, madam, but I can't arrest someone for plowing their own driveway. Sharon looked like she was about to have a stroke. Derek gave me a look that clearly said, "You're technically right, but you're making my life difficult," and I shrugged apologetically. He got back in his cruiser and drove away. The crowd slowly dispersed, everyone shooting me dirty looks as they trudged back to their houses. Sharon remained on my driveway, glaring at me. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "I think I'm tired of being bullied by an HOA that cares more about arbitrary rules than common sense. I'll make your life miserable. You already tried that, Sharon. Now I'm just returning the favor. Have a good night." I went back inside and finally went to bed. Over the next week, I cleared my driveway 3 more times, always at midnight, always with the lights and horn. By the 5th time, most of the neighbors had invested in earplugs and blackout curtains. Some of them had even started to find the humor in it. Mike stopped by one afternoon and admitted that while it was annoying, he respected the commitment to malicious compliance. But Sharon was not amused, not even slightly. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks after my midnight plowing campaign began. I showed up at 6:30, early enough to grab a seat near the front. The community center was packed, standing room only. Apparently, everyone wanted to see how this would play out. Sharon called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a prepared statement. "As you all know, one of our residents has been flagrantly violating the spirit of our community rules by clearing his driveway at midnight with excessive noise and lights. This behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated." I raised my hand. "Point of order, Sharon. I haven't violated any rules. I've complied with the noise ordinance exactly as written. You've violated the spirit of the rule, the spirit. So we're enforcing feelings now instead of actual bylaws," the room murmured. A few people chuckled. Sharon's face went red. "The board has decided to amend the noise ordinance to close this loophole. Effective immediately, no loud mechanical equipment may be operated between 9 at night and 6 in the morning." "You can't change the rules mid-month," Linda Chen said from her seat at the board table. "Bylaw amendments require 30 days' notice and a vote from the full membership." Sharon glared at her. "This is an emergency measure." "There's no provision for emergency bylaw amendments," Linda said, flipping through a copy of the HOA documents. "You'll have to wait until next month." Sharon looked like she wanted to scream. Instead, she took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Fine. We'll put it to a vote next month. In the meantime, I'm issuing a formal warning to Aaron Yates for behavior unbecoming of a Meadowbrook Estates resident." "A formal warning for what?" I asked. "Following the rules." "For disturbing the peace, which isn't actually against HOA rules. Derek Santos already confirmed I'm not breaking any laws. You're disrupting the community." "The community disrupted my livelihood first. I asked nicely for a reasonable accommodation. You denied it. So now I'm working within the system you created. Don't blame me for finding the cracks." The room was silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. Not everyone, maybe about half the room, but enough that Sharon's face went from red to purple. Meeting adjourned. She shouted, slamming her gavel down so hard it cracked. I left the community center feeling like I had won a small battle, but I knew the war was far from over. Sharon was not the type to let something like this go. She would find a way to retaliate, and I needed to be ready. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received another certified letter. This one was not a fine. It was a notice of property inspection. According to the letter, the HOA was exercising its right to inspect my property for code violations, and I was required to allow access within 7 days. I called Ben Parsons again. Can they do that? I asked. Unfortunately, yes. Most HOA agreements include a clause allowing inspections to ensure compliance with community standards. Do you have anything to hide? No, my property is immaculate. I've made sure of it. Then let them inspect. But I'd recommend having a witness present, maybe even recording it yourself. If they try to fabricate violations, you'll want evidence. The inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Sharon showed up with Richard Kowalski and a guy I didn't recognize, someone she introduced as Brad Morrison, a professional property inspector she had hired. I had my phone out, recording everything. Gentlemen, lady, welcome. Feel free to inspect whatever you need. I'll be following along to ensure nothing is damaged or misrepresented. Brad looked uncomfortable. Sir, that's really not necessary. I insist. They spent 2 hours going over every inch of my property. They checked the exterior paint, the condition of my roof, the state of my lawn under the snow, the placement of my trash cans, the landscaping, the driveway, the garage, even the interior of my house when I allowed them access. Brad took notes, photographs, and measurements. Sharon kept trying to find things wrong. Is that a crack in the driveway? Brad examined it. It's a minor surface crack, less than 1/4 inch, well within acceptable parameters. What about the paint on the garage door? It's in excellent condition. The bushes look overgrown. They're dormant for winter. I can't make a determination until spring. This went on for the entire inspection. By the end, Brad looked exhausted and Sharon looked furious. So, she demanded, what violations did you find? Brad flipped through his notes. None. The property is in excellent condition, well above the standards required by the HOA agreement. That's impossible. Check again. Madam, I've been thorough. There are no violations. Sharon snatched the notebook from his hands and scanned through it as if she could find something he missed. Finally, she threw it back at him. Fine. We're done here. They left, and I went back inside, relieved but unsettled. Sharon was not going to stop, and I had no idea what her next move would be. I found out 2 weeks later when I received a notice that my HOA dues were increasing. For everyone else in the neighborhood, the annual dues were going up by $50 to cover landscaping costs. For me, they were going up by $500. I immediately called an emergency meeting with Ben Parsons. Can they do this? I asked, showing him the notice. Ben read it carefully. No, HOA dues have to be uniform across all properties unless there's a specific reason for differentiation, like different lot sizes or amenities. This is clearly discriminatory. So what do I do? You file a complaint with the board, and if they don't correct it, you sue. I filed the complaint that afternoon. Sharon responded with a letter stating that the increase was due to additional administrative costs associated with managing properties that require extra oversight. In other words, because I had been a pain in her backside, she was charging me more. Ben drafted a lawsuit and I filed it in county court. The legal fees were adding up, but I was done playing nice. Sharon had made this personal, and I was going to see it through to the end. The lawsuit got the attention of the rest of the HOA board. Linda Chen reached out to me a few days after I filed. Aaron, can we talk? She asked when I answered her call. Sure, what's up? I want to apologize for how Sharon has been treating you. Not all of us agree with her approach. Then why haven't you done anything about it? Linda sighed. Because Sharon controls the board. Richard does whatever she says. Patricia is too timid to speak up and Daniel doesn't care. I'm the only dissenting voice and I get outvoted on everything. So what can I do? Run for the board. Elections are in 3 months. If you can get enough support, you could replace Sharon or at least add more reasonable voices to the board. It was not a bad idea. I had never considered running for the HOA board because it seemed like a colossal waste of time, but if it meant getting rid of Sharon, it might be worth it. I'll think about it, I said. Think fast. The filing deadline is in 2 weeks. I spent the next few days talking to neighbors, gauging interest, and trying to figure out if I actually had a shot. To my surprise, a lot of people were fed up with Sharon. She had been fining people for minor infractions for years, enforcing rules inconsistently, and generally making life miserable for anyone who didn't fall in line. One neighbor, a woman named Jessica Reeves who lived 2 streets over, told me she had been fined $300 for having a vegetable garden in her backyard because it wasn't aesthetically consistent with community standards. Another neighbor, Tom Brennan, had been fined for parking his work van in his driveway overnight, even though the van was clean, professional, and barely distinguishable from a regular vehicle. The more I talked to people, the more I realized Sharon had been running Meadowbrook Estates like her personal fiefdom for years, and people were tired of it. I filed to run for the board with a week to spare. My platform was simple: reasonable rules, fair enforcement, and respect for homeowners. I didn't have a campaign budget, so I went door to door, introduced myself, and listened to people's concerns. Sharon, meanwhile, launched a smear campaign. She sent out a mass email to all residents accusing me of disrupting the community, harassing neighbors, and refusing to follow basic rules. She conveniently left out the parts about her denying my reasonable request and me being forced into malicious compliance. Linda Chen leaked a copy of my original exception request to me, and I sent out my own mass email with the full story. The fine, the denied exception, the threat to my business, and Sharon's retaliatory actions. I included screenshots of the bylaws, the inspection report showing my property had no violations, and the discriminatory dues increase. The response was overwhelming. My inbox flooded with supportive messages. People started sharing their own stories of Sharon's tyranny. A Facebook group formed called Meadowbrook Residents for Change, and within a week, it had over 100 members. Sharon tried to shut it down by claiming it violated HOA rules about unapproved community communications. But the group simply moved to a private setting and kept growing. The election was held at the monthly HOA meeting in March. The community center was packed with every voting member of the HOA present. Sharon looked confident as she called the meeting to order. "We have 3 open seats on the board this year," she announced. "The candidates are myself, Richard Kowalski, and Aaron Yates for the standard seats. Linda Chen is running unopposed for her seat. We'll now open the floor for candidate statements." Richard went first, giving a boring speech about maintaining property values and preserving community standards. Sharon went next, talking about her 7 years of dedicated service and her commitment to excellence. Then it was my turn. I stood up and looked around the room. "I'm not going to give you a polished speech. I'm just going to tell you the truth. For the past 2 months, I've been plowing my driveway at midnight with lights and sirens because the HOA refused to let me do it at a reasonable hour. That's insane. But you know what's more insane? The fact that it took something that ridiculous to get people to pay attention to how this board operates." I paused, letting that sink in. Sharon has been using the HOA to punish people who don't fall in line. She's issued fines for vegetable gardens, work vehicles, and clearing snow at the wrong time. She's tried to charge me $500 more in dues than everyone else out of spite, and when I followed her rules exactly as written, She tried to change them to shut me up. People were nodding. Some were pulling out their phones, probably checking the Facebook group or texting neighbors. I'm running for the board because I believe an HOA should serve the community, not control it. Rules should be reasonable, enforcement should be fair, and homeowners should be treated with respect. If you're tired of being fined for living in your own house, vote for change. That's all I've got. I sat down to applause. Sharon looked livid. The voting took 30 minutes. Linda Chen and I counted the ballots while Sharon watched like a hawk. When we finished, Linda announced the results. For the 3 open seats, Aaron Yates, 243 votes. Linda Chen, 238 votes. Patricia Gomez, 194 votes. Richard Kowalski, 162 votes. Sharon Mitchell, 147 votes. The room erupted in cheers. Sharon sat frozen in her seat, her face pale. She had lost. After 7 years as HOA president, she had been voted off the board entirely. Linda called for a vote for board positions. I was elected vice president. Linda remained as treasurer, and Patricia, who had apparently grown a spine in the last few weeks, was elected president. We immediately held an emergency board meeting and voted to rescind my discriminatory dues increase, refund my original fine, and amend the noise ordinance to allow necessary maintenance between 5 and 6 in the morning. Sharon sat in the audience, silent for once. But the story didn't end there. Sharon was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. 2 weeks after the election, I received a call from the county sheriff's office. Detective Maria Campos wanted to speak with me about a fraud investigation. I met her at the station, confused and worried. "Mr. Yates, thank you for coming in," Detective Campos said, gesturing for me to sit. "I want to ask you some questions about the Meadowbrook Estates HOA." "Okay, what's this about?" "We've received information that there may have been financial irregularities during Sharon Mitchell's tenure as president. Can you tell me about your interactions with her?" I explained everything. The fine, the inspection, the dues increase, the election. Detective Campos took notes, nodding occasionally. "Did you ever have access to HOA financial records?" she asked. "No." "Why?" "We're investigating possible embezzlement. A former board member came forward with concerns that HOA funds were being misused. We're trying to determine the scope." My stomach dropped. How much are we talking about? Potentially over $100,000 over the past 5 years. I sat back in my chair, stunned. What was she spending it on? That's what we're trying to figure out. Designer handbags, luxury vacations, home renovations. All purchased with HOA checks or credit cards. Can you prove it? We're building a case. I'm talking to board members and residents to establish a pattern of behavior. Your lawsuit actually helped us. The financial records you subpoenaed showed discrepancies that caught our attention. Over the next 2 months, the investigation expanded. Detective Campos discovered that Sharon had been writing checks to herself for administrative expenses that were never approved by the board. She had used the HOA credit card for personal purchases and disguised them as community expenses. She had even inflated vendor invoices and pocketed the difference. In total, Sharon had stolen over $130,000 from the HOA over 5 years. The arrest happened on a Wednesday morning. I watched from my window as 2 sheriff's deputies walked up to Sharon's house and knocked on the door. Sharon answered in her bathrobe, and I could see her face go white as they showed her the warrant. She was handcuffed and led to a patrol car while her husband stood in the doorway, looking shocked and helpless. The charges were extensive: embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and theft. The county prosecutor was pushing for maximum penalties, and Sharon's lawyer was scrambling to negotiate a plea deal. The case went to trial 4 months later. I was called as a witness, along with Linda Chen, Patricia Gomez, and about a dozen other residents. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, credit card statements, forged signatures, falsified invoices. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Sharon was sentenced to 6 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband filed for divorce. 2 weeks later, Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal after that. Patricia turned out to be a decent president, focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. We repealed several of the more ridiculous bylaws, including the one about vegetable gardens. Jessica Reeves planted tomatoes that summer, and they were beautiful. I kept my snow removal business and continued to clear my driveway at 5 in the morning during winter. No one complained. In fact, a few neighbors hired me to clear theirs as well. The light bar and air horn remained mounted on my truck, a reminder of the most absurd fight I had ever been a part of. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I would go out to the garage and just look at them, shaking my head at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. But I didn't regret it. Sharon had tried to bully me into submission, and instead, I had exposed her corruption and freed an entire neighborhood from her tyranny. It had cost me time, money, and a lot of sleep, but it had been worth it. One evening in late spring, about a year after everything had settled down, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Mike from down the street walked over with 2 beers. "Thought you might want one," he said, handing me a bottle. "Thanks." I twisted off the cap and took a sip. Mike settled into the chair next to me. "You know, I was thinking about that whole midnight plowing thing." "Yeah, it was the dumbest, most brilliant thing I've ever seen. I was so mad at the time, but looking back, it's kind of legendary." I laughed. "It felt pretty dumb while I was doing it. But it worked. You got rid of Sharon, fixed the HOA, and now we can all live in peace. That's worth a few sleepless nights." "I guess so." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching the sky turn orange and pink. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Kids played in yards, people walked dogs, someone was grilling in their backyard. It felt like a real community, not a dictatorship. "Hey, Aaron," Mike said after a while. "Yeah, thanks for fighting back. A lot of us were too tired or too scared to stand up to her. You did it for all of us." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Mike finished his beer, clapped me on the shoulder, and headed home. I stayed on the porch until the stars came out, thinking about everything that had happened. The fine, the fights, the election, the trial. It had been exhausting and infuriating and stressful, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes, standing up to a bully means getting creative. Sometimes, it means being petty and ridiculous and making life difficult for everyone, including yourself. But sometimes, that's what it takes to expose the truth and create real change. I finished my beer, went inside, and slept better than I had in months. The following winter brought the usual Wisconsin snowstorms, and I resumed my snow removal routine without incident. But there was one morning, about 2 weeks into the season, when I woke up to find a note taped to my truck. "Thanks for keeping the neighborhood clear. You're a legend. P.S. Please don't ever use the air horn again." I laughed and tucked the note into my wallet. It stayed there as a reminder that sometimes the most effective way to fight an unjust rule is to follow it so literally that everyone realizes how ridiculous it is. Over the next few years, Meadowbrook Estates transformed into the kind of community it should have been all along. We updated the bylaws to focus on actual property maintenance and safety rather than arbitrary aesthetic standards. We elected board members who cared about serving residents rather than controlling them. And we made sure that anyone with a reasonable request for an exception would be heard and treated fairly. I eventually stepped down from the board after serving 2 terms, satisfied that the HOA was in good hands. My snow removal business continued to grow, and I picked up more clients throughout the county. Some of them even hired me specifically because they had heard the story of the midnight plowing and thought anyone that dedicated to malicious compliance deserved their business. Sharon served 4 years of her 6-year sentence and was released on parole. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona and took a job as a receptionist at a dental office. Her ex-husband Greg stayed in Meadowbrook Estates for a while before eventually selling the house and moving closer to his kids. I saw him once at the grocery store, and he thanked me for exposing Sharon's fraud. He said he had no idea what she had been doing and felt terrible about it. I told him it wasn't his fault. Sharon had been good at hiding her crimes and even better at deflecting blame. It had taken a whole community waking up and paying attention to bring her down. Years later, I still live in Meadowbrook Estates. My house is paid off, my business is thriving, and I've even started dating again. Something I never thought I would do after my wife passed. The neighborhood kids know me as the guy with the cool plow truck, and in winter they gather to watch me clear my driveway, hoping I'll honk the air horn just once for old time's sake. I never do, though. Once was enough. That horn served its purpose, and now it's just a relic of a fight I never wanted but am glad I had. Because sometimes the fight isn't really about snow or noise ordinances or HOA rules. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient, even when it makes you look ridiculous, and even when everyone else thinks you should just let it go. I didn't let it go, and an entire community is better for it. On particularly snowy mornings, when I'm out at 5 in the morning clearing my driveway in blessed silence with only the sound of the plow blade scraping against concrete, I think about that first midnight run with the lights flashing and the horn blaring. I think about Sharon's face when she realized I had found the loophole in her precious rules. I think about the election, the trial, and the slow, satisfying process of watching justice actually work the way it's supposed to. And then I think about my wife, who would have loved the whole ridiculous saga. She always said I had a talent for finding creative solutions to impossible problems. I wish she could have been there to see it, but in a way, maybe she was. Maybe that's why I had the courage to fight back in the first place. Because she taught me that life is too short to let petty tyrants make you miserable, and that sometimes the best response to unreasonable demands is unreasonable compliance. I finish clearing my driveway, park the truck, and head inside to make coffee before my first client call. The sun is just starting to rise, painting the snow-covered neighborhood in shades of gold and pink. It's beautiful, peaceful, and exactly the kind of morning my wife would have loved. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, in a community that finally feels like home. The midnight plowing incident became something of a local legend. Every now and then, someone new moves into Meadowbrook Estates and hears the story, usually from one of the long-time residents who loves to embellish the details. The light bar gets brighter in every retelling, the horn gets louder, and my act of defiance gets more dramatic. I don't mind. Let them tell the story however they want. The truth is strange enough on its own. What matters is that we built something better from the ashes of Sharon's reign of terror. We proved that HOAs don't have to be oppressive, that rules can be reasonable, and that communities work better when people are treated with dignity and respect, rather than fear and intimidation. And we proved that sometimes, when the system won't listen to reason, you have to make enough noise that ignoring you becomes impossible. Even if that noise comes at midnight with red and blue lights flashing, and an air horn that can wake the dead, especially then.